Those 4 words would haunt me for the rest of my life. Not because they hurt, though they did, but because they were the moment everything changed. The moment I stopped being David Martinez, the quiet employee who took abuse with a smile, and became someone else entirely, someone dangerous. The morning started like any other Tuesday in hell. My alarm screamed at 5:30 a.m., dragging me from the only peace I knew anymore, sleep. Even my dreams had become infected with visions of spreadsheets and Marcus Brennan's cold, calculating stare, but those precious 6 hours of unconsciousness were the only time I wasn't thinking about work, about deadlines, about the quarterly report that had consumed my life for the past 3 months. I rolled out of bed, careful not to wake Maria. She'd been distant lately, probably tired of my constant stress and the way I'd been coming home later and later each night. Our conversations had dwindled to logistics. Who's picking up the kids? What bills need paying? When the car needs an oil change? The intimacy we'd once shared had been replaced by the kind of polite distance you see between strangers sharing an elevator. "Morning, Daddy," Sophia chirped as I stumbled into the kitchen. My 8-year-old daughter was already dressed for school, her dark hair in pigtails, her uniform pristine. She had Maria's eyes, warm, trusting, innocent, eyes that still looked at me like I was her hero. If only she knew how wrong she was. "Morning, Princess," I managed, forcing a smile as I poured coffee into my travel mug. The liquid was black as my mood, bitter as my prospects. "Did you finish your math homework?" "Yep." Mommy helped me with the hard parts. She showed me her notebook, filled with careful additions and subtractions. "Look, I got them all right." Pride swelled in my chest, real, genuine emotion cutting through the fog of anxiety that had become my constant companion. "That's my smart girl. I'm so proud of you. Will you be home for dinner tonight?" she asked, and the innocent question hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd missed dinner 4 nights in a row, staying late at the office to perfect the quarterly report that would be presented today. Every graph had been checked and rechecked. Every projection had been verified against 3 different data sources. Every recommendation had been backed up with solid research and conservative estimates. It was the best work I'd ever done. It had to be. "I'll try, sweetheart," I lied, knowing that win or lose, today would probably end with me working late again. If the presentation went well, there would be follow-up meetings and implementation plans. If it went badly, well, I didn't want to think about that possibility. The drive to downtown Chicago was a blur of morning traffic and talk radio. The hosts were discussing some political scandal, their voices filled with the kind of outrage that comes from never having to worry about their next paycheck. I envied them their certainty, their ability to speak without fear of consequences. I parked in the company garage and took the elevator to the 34th floor, where Brennan and Associates occupied half the building. The law firm specialized in corporate defense, helping big companies avoid responsibility when their products hurt people or their executives broke the law. It was lucrative work, and Marcus Brennan had built an empire on the principle that everyone was guilty of something. You just had to know where to look. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Good morning, Mr. Martinez," the receptionist called out as I walked past her desk. Angela was 22, fresh out of college, still bright-eyed enough to believe that hard work would be rewarded and good people finished first. I'd been like her once back when I thought my MBA and my work ethic would be enough to build a successful career. "Morning, Angela," I replied, trying to match her enthusiasm. "Big day today." "The quarterly presentation, right? I'm sure you'll do great." Her confidence was touching and misplaced. In the 3 years I'd worked here, I'd never seen Brennan respond positively to any presentation that wasn't his own. He had a talent for finding flaws in even the most perfect work, turning every meeting into an opportunity to remind everyone who was in charge. My office was on the 29th floor, 5 floors below Brennan's executive suite. It was small but professional, with a view of the lake that I rarely had time to appreciate. The walls were covered with certificates and awards, my MBA from Northwestern, recognition for completing various professional development courses, a photo of me shaking hands with the mayor at some charity event. All of it felt like someone else's life now. I set my briefcase on the desk and pulled out the quarterly report, bound in a leather portfolio that had cost me $200. The expense had seemed reasonable at the time. A professional presentation deserved professional materials. Now, looking at the pristine cover, I wondered if I was just polishing a turd. The report was comprehensive, analyzing every aspect of the firm's operations over the past 3 months. Revenue was up 12%, thanks to 3 major corporate clients I'd helped land. Operating expenses were down 8%, due to efficiency improvements I'd implemented in the document review process. Client satisfaction scores were the highest they'd been in 2 years. By any objective measure, it was a success story. But objective measures didn't matter when Marcus Brennan was involved. He had a gift for twisting good news into bad news, for finding problems where none existed, for making everyone feel like failures, even when they succeeded. I'd learned this the hard way during my first quarterly presentation 3 years ago. I'd been nervous but optimistic, convinced that my thorough analysis and practical recommendations would impress the senior partners. Instead, Brennan had spent 45 minutes tearing apart my methodology, questioning my data sources, and suggesting that perhaps I wasn't cut out for serious analytical work. The humiliation had been complete and public. Jennifer from HR had actually winced. Tom from finance had studied his shoes like they contained the secrets of the universe. Sarah from marketing had smirked the entire time, clearly enjoying my discomfort. I'd gone home that night and drunk half a bottle of whiskey, then spent the next day nursing a hangover and wondering if I should start looking for another job. But the mortgage wasn't going to pay itself, and Maria was pregnant with our second child. And jobs in my field weren't exactly growing on trees, so I'd stayed and endured, and slowly died inside, one meeting at a time. The phone on my desk buzzed, startling me from my dark memories. "Mr. Martinez?" Angela's voice was tight with nervous energy. "Mr. Brennan wants to see you in conference room A. The quarterly meeting has been moved up to 9 o'clock. I glanced at my watch. 8:47 a.m. Barely enough time to grab my materials and compose myself. "Did he say why it was moved up?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would be useless. "No, sir. He just said to tell you to bring that report you've been working on, and not to keep him waiting." The dismissive tone in her voice told me she was quoting him directly. Even his instructions were designed to diminish me, to make it clear that my months of work were just that report to him. I gathered my materials and headed for the elevator, my heart already beginning to race. The ride to the 34th floor felt like ascending to my own execution. The elevator music was some instrumental version of a Beatles song, cheerful and completely inappropriate for my mood. Conference room A was the largest meeting space in the building, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline and a table that could seat 20 people. It was where Brennan held his most important meetings, where million-dollar deals were negotiated and careers were made, or destroyed. Today, it would be the site of my latest humiliation. Sarah was the last to leave, and she paused beside me as I knelt on the floor, still collecting pages. "Better luck next time, Cow," she whispered, quiet enough that only I could hear. Then she walked out, her heels clicking on the polished floor, like castanets. I stayed on the floor for another 10 minutes, making sure I had every single page. Some of the charts had been torn when Brennan swept them off the table. Others were wrinkled from being stepped on. All of them felt heavier than they should have, weighted down with failure and humiliation. When I finally stood up, the conference room was empty except for me and the ghost of my dignity. The elevator ride back to my floor was a blur. Angela smiled at me when I walked past her desk, but I couldn't manage to smile back. My face felt frozen, like the muscles had forgotten how to work. In my office, I closed the door and sat down at my desk, the damaged report spread out in front of me. I tried to reorganize the pages to put them back in some semblance of order, but my hands were shaking too badly to do it properly. I kept hearing Brennan's voice, "You move like a cow." I kept seeing the laughter in their eyes, the joy they'd taken. In my humiliation, I kept feeling the weight of 3 years of abuse, 3 years of swallowing my pride and accepting treatment that no human being should have to endure. Something inside me had broken in that conference room, not just my spirit. I'd been slowly dying inside for years. This was something deeper, more fundamental. It was the part of me that had been willing to take abuse for the sake of keeping the peace, for the sake of providing for my family, for the sake of maintaining the illusion that I was building a career. That part of me was gone now, swept away with the scattered pages of my quarterly report. What remained was something harder, colder, more calculating. I picked up my phone and called. "Maria." "Hey," she said, her voice warm with surprise. "You never call during the day. Is everything okay?" "I'm going to be working late tonight," I said, my voice steady for the first time all day. "Again?" "David, you've been working late every night this week. The kids miss you. I miss you." "I know. I'm sorry. But this is important." There was a long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, sadder. "More important than your family." The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to face. "I have to go," I said. "I'll make it up to you this weekend." Another lie. By this weekend, everything would be different. I hung up and stared out my window. At the Chicago skyline, the city looked the same as it had that morning, but everything felt different. The buildings seemed sharper, more defined. The sky was clearer. Even the sounds from the street below seemed more distinct. It was like I'd been living my life out of focus, and someone had finally adjusted the lens. I opened my laptop and created a new document. At the top, I typed, "Incident Report Number 1, Marcus Brennan, Abusive Conduct." Then I began to write. Date, Tuesday, October 15th, 2024. Time, approximately 9:20 a.m. Location, conference room, A, 34th floor. Witnesses, Jennifer Walsh, HR, Tom Chen, Finance, Sarah Williams, Marketing. During the quarterly review meeting, Marcus Brennan engaged in the following abusive behaviors. Publicly humiliated employee by calling work garbage without proper review. 2. Physically destroyed employee's report by throwing it on the floor. 3. Used derogatory language, specifically calling employee a cow. 4. Encouraged other employees to laugh at and record the humiliation. 5. Threatened employees' job security without cause. I wrote for an hour, documenting everything I could remember about the meeting, every word, every gesture, every moment of cruelty. When I was finished, I had 3 pages of detailed notes that read like a prosecutor's brief. But it wasn't enough. One incident, no matter how well documented, would be dismissed as a personality, conflict, or a misunderstanding. If I was going to take down Marcus Brennan, I needed more than one bad day. I needed a pattern. I saved the document and created another one. Marcus Brennan. Historical incidents. This would be harder. I'd spent 3 years trying to forget the things Brennan had done to me, the humiliations I'd endured, the abuse I'd normalized. Now I needed to remember everything, to dig up memories I'd buried for the sake of my own sanity. Incident number 2, July 2022. Called my presentation pathetic in front of visiting clients. Incident number 3, September 2022, made me work through lunch. To redo a project, then use none of my revisions. Incident number 4, November 2022. Suggested I was too stupid to understand complex legal concepts. Incident number 5, January 2023. Threw a coffee mug at the wall during a meeting, saying it was what he wanted to do to my worthless head. The memories came flooding back, each one more painful than the last. I'd forgotten how bad it had been in the beginning, before I'd learned to keep my head down and my mouth shut, before I'd become the kind of person who could stand there and take abuse without fighting back. I worked through lunch, through the afternoon, through the evening. By the time the cleaning crew arrived, I had filled 27 pages with documented incidents of abuse, harassment, and misconduct. 3 years of systematic cruelty laid out in chronological order with dates, times, locations, and witnesses. But even as I wrote, I knew it still wasn't enough. Brennan was smart, careful, powerful. He'd been destroying people for decades without consequence. A list of grievances from one disgruntled employee wouldn't be enough to bring him down. I needed proof. Real, undeniable, prosecutable proof. And I was going to get it the night janitor knocked on my door around midnight. "Working late again, Mr. Martinez?" Jorge was 63, had been cleaning offices for 30 years, and had the kind of wisdom that comes from watching people when they think no one is looking. "Yeah," I said, saving my document and closing the laptop. "Big project." "You know," Jorge said, emptying my trash can. "I've been cleaning this building for 15 years. I've seen a lot of people come and go. You want some advice?" I looked up at him, this quiet man who moved through the building like a ghost, invisible to most of the people who worked here. Sure. Powerful men like Mr. Brennan, they think they're untouchable. They think they can treat people however they want because no one will ever hold them accountable. He tied off the trash bag and looked me in the eye. "But everyone has secrets. Everyone makes mistakes. You just have to know where to look." He left without another word, pushing his cart down the hallway toward the next office. But his words stayed with me as I gathered my things and headed for the elevator. Everyone has secrets. Everyone makes mistakes. I thought about that during the drive home, during the quiet conversation with Maria about her day and the kids' school projects. I thought about it as I tucked Sophia into bed and read her a story about a brave princess who defeated an evil dragon. "Daddy," she said as I turned off her light. "Are you okay? You seem sad." I kissed her forehead, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I'm fine, princess. Just thinking about work." "Is work hard?" "Sometimes, but it's going to get better soon." "Promise?" "I promise." Another lie. But this one felt different. This one felt like hope. Back in my home office, I opened my laptop and created a new document. Operation Breakdown. Marcus Brennan Investigation. Phase 1. Documentation. Complete. Phase 2. Evidence Gathering. In progress. Phase 3. Coordination with authorities. Pending. Phase 4. Execution. Pending. He stared at the screen for a long time, thinking about what I was planning to do. It was dangerous, possibly illegal, definitely life-changing. If I got caught, I'd lose my job, my career, possibly my freedom. Maria would leave me. The kids would grow up with a father who was either in prison or unemployable. But if I didn't act, if I just continued to accept the abuse and hope things would get better, I'd lose something far more important than my job. I'd lose my soul. I thought about Sophia's trusting eyes, about the pride she'd shown in her homework that morning. I thought about the man I wanted to be for her, the kind of father who stood up to bullies instead of cowering before them. I thought about Marcus Brennan's pale blue eyes, filled with contempt as he called me a cow. I thought about the laughter, the cruelty, the systematic destruction of human dignity that he practiced like an art form. And I began to type. Step 1. Identify security vulnerabilities in building access systems. Step 2. Map Brennan's daily routine, including after-hours activities. Step 3. Gain access to financial records and personnel files. Step 4. Document any illegal activities or policy violations. Step 5. Identify and approach potential witnesses, victims. Step 6. Compile comprehensive dossier for legal authorities. It was past 3 a.m. when I finally went to bed. Maria was asleep, curled up on her side of the bed, her dark hair spread across the pillow. She looked peaceful, unaware that her husband had just committed himself to a course of action that would change everything. I lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the point of no return. Once I started gathering evidence, once I began investigating Brennan's secrets, there would be no going back. He was too dangerous, too vindictive to let something like that slide. It would be war, and only one of us would survive it. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I could hear Brennan's voice echoing in my head. You move like a cow. Tomorrow, I would show him just how dangerous a cow could be when it decided to fight back. The hunt was about to begin. I arrived at 8:59, clutching my report like a shield. The room was already occupied by the usual suspects, the department heads who formed Brennan's inner circle, all of them looking various degrees of uncomfortable. Jennifer Walsh from HR sat at the far end of the table, her auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun, her expression carefully neutral. She was 43, divorced, and had worked for the firm for 8 years. In all that time, I'd never seen her stand up to Brennan, never seen her defend an employee who was being mistreated. She was a survivor, and survivors learn to keep their heads down. Tom Chen from finance was nervously adjusting his glasses, a nervous tic I'd observed during every meeting for the past 3 years. He was brilliant with numbers, but terrified of confrontation, which made him the perfect target for Brennan's psychological games. Tom had actually started therapy last year, though he thought no one knew about it. Sarah Williams from marketing was filing her nails, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. She was 31, ambitious, and completely without scruples. If there was a ladder to climb, Sarah would climb it, regardless of who she had to step on along the way. She'd made partner 2 years ago by taking credit for a campaign I'd developed, and Brennan had let her do it. At the head of the table sat Marcus Brennan himself, looking like the corporate predator he was. At 55, he was still handsome, in a cold, calculating way. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit probably cost more than I made in a month, and his pale blue eyes missed nothing. He had the kind of presence that filled a room, commanding attention and respect. Through sheer force of personality, he was also, without question, the most dangerous person I'd ever met. "Martinez," he said without looking up from his phone. "You're late." I glanced at the wall clock. 9, exactly. "Sir, I don't want to hear your excuses." His voice was flat, emotionless, which somehow made it more threatening than if he'd been shouting. "We're all busy people here. Let's see what you've managed to put together." I approached his end of the table, my legs feeling unsteady. The report in my hands suddenly felt heavy, like it was made of lead instead of paper. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, could smell the expensive cologne Brennan wore, could see the way the morning light caught the gold of his watch. The quarterly analysis shows significant improvements across all major metrics, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. Revenue is up 12%, operating costs are down 8%, and client satisfaction scores are at a 2-year high. I've also identified 3 key areas where we can... Brennan held up one perfectly manicured hand, silencing me mid-sentence. He took the report from my hands and began flipping through it, his expression growing more disgusted with each page. The silence stretched on forever. Tom cleared his throat nervously. Jennifer studied her hands. Sarah continued filing her nails, the tiny scraping sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. Finally, Brennan looked up at me, his pale eyes filled with contempt. "This is garbage," he said simply. The words hit me like a physical blow. 3 months of work, dismissed in 2 words. "Sir, if you look at the data..." "The data?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You call this data? These are amateur hour spreadsheets that wouldn't pass muster in a community college business class." My face began to burn. I could feel the others watching, could sense their mixture of pity and relief that they weren't in my position. "Your methodology is flawed," Brennan continued, warming to his theme. "Your conclusions are unsupported. Your recommendations are naive and impractical. This isn't analysis. It's wishful thinking dressed up in fancy charts." Each word was carefully chosen to wound, delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. I stood there, frozen, as he systematically destroyed not just my work, but my competence, my intelligence, my worth as a human being. "Look at this graph," he said, holding up page 15. You're showing a correlation between client satisfaction and revenue growth, but you haven't controlled for market conditions, seasonal variations, or competitive factors. It's the kind of mistake a first-year business student might make. The criticism was technically valid but unfairly applied. I had controlled for those factors. The supporting data was in Appendix C, which he clearly hadn't bothered to read. But pointing that out would only make things worse. Brennan didn't like being corrected, especially not in front of his department heads. And this recommendation about expanding our corporate defense practice? He shook his head in mock disbelief. Do you have any idea what kind of investment that would require? What kind of expertise we'd need to hire? You're talking about millions of dollars based on 3 months of data. Again, the criticism missed the mark. My recommendation had been carefully qualified, suggesting a pilot program with limited scope and built-in evaluation metrics. But nuance was lost on Brennan when he was in destruction mode. The assault continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Every page was dissected, every assumption questioned, every conclusion ridiculed. My hands began to shake, and I clenched them into fists to hide the tremor. The worst part, Brennan said, finally closing the report, is that you actually think this is good work. You've spent 3 months producing this amateur hour garbage, and you're standing there like you expect praise. He stood up, holding the report in both hands, and for a moment I thought he might hand it back to me. Instead, he held it out over the table and let it drop. The leather portfolio hit the polished wood with a dull thud, and the carefully organized pages scattered across the surface. Charts and graphs and spreadsheets, 3 months of my life, spread out like confetti at a funeral. But he wasn't done. With one swift motion, Brennan swept his arm across the table, sending the pages flying. They fluttered through the air like wounded birds before settling on the floor around my feet. "You move like a cow," he said, his voice filled with disgust. The room went dead silent. Even Sarah stopped filing her nails. "Slow, clumsy, absolutely useless," he continued, each word landing like a hammer blow. "Look at you, just standing there with your mouth open. Do something. Clean up your mess." I stared down at the scattered pages, my vision blurring with tears. I refused to shed. 3 months of 60-hour weeks. 3 months of missed dinners and forgotten anniversaries and bedtime stories I'd never read. 3 months of my life scattered on the floor like garbage. And then I heard it. A snicker. Tom was trying to hide it behind his hand, but his shoulders were shaking. Jennifer had turned away, but I could see her reflection in the window. She was smiling. Sarah wasn't even trying to hide her amusement. The snicker became a chuckle. The chuckle became laughter. Within seconds, the entire room was filled with the sound of my humiliation. They were laughing at me, at my work, at my failure, at the pathetic sight of me standing frozen among the scattered remains of my professional dignity. "You know what, Martinez?" Brennan's voice cut through the laughter like a knife. "You're lucky we haven't fired you yet." The laughter got louder. Tom was wiping tears from his eyes. Jennifer was covering her mouth with both hands, her shoulders shaking with suppressed mirth. Sarah had actually pulled out her phone and was recording the whole thing. "The only reason you still have a job," Brennan continued, "is because it would be too much paperwork to replace you. Finding someone else who moves like a cow might be challenging. More laughter, harder this time, meaner. The kind of laughter that strips away your humanity and leaves you feeling like something less than human." I bent down and began gathering the scattered pages, my movements mechanical, robotic. My tie had somehow gotten twisted during my frozen moment of shock, and I straightened it with numb fingers. The laughter gradually died down as the entertainment value of watching me crawl around on the floor diminished. "Meeting adjourned," Brennan announced, already turning his attention back to his phone. "Next time, Martinez, try not to waste everyone's time with your kindergarten-level analysis." They filed out one by one, most of them avoiding eye contact. Tom mumbled something that might have been an apology, but I couldn't be sure. Jennifer gathered her papers with military precision, her neutral expression firmly back in place.